Jan, you showed me an article from Nature from 2020 entitled "The Problem with Pandemic Planning." And the article was in the context of, business wargaming, foresighting, predicting, and these areas. And the article says, and I'm quoting from the article, 2 decades of war game scenarios predicted leaky travel bans, a scramble for vaccines, and disputes between state and federal leaders, but none predicted Donald Trump. So, what exactly is it that no one was able to predict about Trump?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would be a bit uncomfortable with the term prediction because that kind of indicates that we can predict the future. I think rather what this points out to that is maybe that 20 years of wargaming helped to fairly well anticipate what happens with such a pandemic and what is involved. But that somebody like Donald Trump being in a way dysfunctional in dealing with the crisis couldn't be anticipated. And that, of course, kind of hints to one predominantly theme within Foresight that we cannot by 100% accuracy predict anything, but that we probably have tools that help us to anticipate fairly well what could happen. And back then, probably when those war games were evolving, nobody could imagine somebody like Donald Trump being in the White House.
And this is without, any evaluation of him being in the White House is good or bad. It's just interesting to understand this from a business wargaming and also strategic perspective. Tell me a little bit more about your background. So you're a professor of strategic foresight and trend analysis, and you're also the head of the Bavarian Foresight Institute at the Technical University of Ingolstadt in Germany, Europe. And you're also a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Foresight Network.
Mhm.
So your scientific background goes back to your early studies, including future studies and master program, PhD at the intersection of management and foresight. So there is a lot of background. And of all of these research areas you could have chosen, why strategic foresight?
I think this, in a way, goes back to probably, to be honest, over 20 years with an internship I did with back then Deutsche Bank in a department that was experimenting with what they back then called strategic early warning systems, and I found this idea totally fascinating to try to find an approach to early understand what is happening around an organization, to give an organization time to react properly. And then really thinking about, well, how could the future evolve? And I think one of the fascinating things that still stays with me is that the future is so relevant for us as humans, as organizations. We constantly make decisions about the future. And it is still something which we can't really grasp. It is nothing we can put on the table. And I think this is something that I still find really fascinating. On the one hand side, that relevance, and on the other hand, the difficulty in a way of dealing with it as an individual or an organization. And that's what I still find in a way fascinating about the field of futures and foresight.
Now, specifically, you're known for not only, but particularly known for your work on business wargaming. Jan, is business war?
No, not predominantly. I mean, the term comes from military wargaming. It depends on the industry you're in. I think often business leaders experiencing competition as being something very brutal when they fight over market shares, when they are in an industry which in a way might not be growing at a high rate or even declining. I'm not quite sure if they would all perceive it as war, but that competition being something in a way sometimes brutal that you need to deal with. However, and maybe we'll talk also about that, wargaming also has those aspects of understanding how to cooperate with others. So it's not only just about war.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, interesting. I mean, the name kind of is there for a reason, right? So for those that are not familiar with it, can you maybe explain what business wargaming is and where it actually comes
Yeah.
from?
I mean, it comes from the military. And it probably goes back in history, back to ancient Greek times when military leaders tried to understand, when I do this or that, what will my opponent do? And this has been ever since, and something which has been or still being used in the military to train military officers, but also to understand or trying to anticipate what could be situations within military interactions. And in a way, this idea has been adopted into a business context, and then kind of that just the term business has been added to wargaming. I mean, predominantly, business wargaming is a role playing situation of in a business context of a dynamic business situation. So managers stepping into the shoes of maybe their competitors and trying to understand and trying to anticipate how the future of their industry could evolve.
And so, in what situation do you find business wargaming to be most useful?
Um, I would argue that nowadays, where pretty much every industry is under pressure in terms of changes, transformation, um, that probably all, in a way, industries are kind of are forced into a to think about how could the future evolve, and it then is in a way maybe that you have different approaches to how to use a business war game. For instance, in an industry which is declining, uh, the aim of a war game probably would be more about fighting about existing market shares, thinking about M&A activities. If I'm in an industry
Mhm.
which is growing, it is probably more finding about cooperation partners, or thinking about innovations. But predominantly, I would argue that it is useful if questions arise like, how will my competitors act and react in the future? Do I see new competitors coming into the game? How will they act and react? And maybe overall, what are the most likely dynamics in my industry?
So let's walk through some of the mechanics
Mhm.
of a business war game. So how can I imagine a game to look
Mhm.
like? Is this a group of managers in a room, just battling each other? Probably not, right? So what is the process? How long do you play it? Who's playing? Are there some rules? How does a typical business war game,
Mhm.
if there is a typical business war game, look like?
Well, I would argue in a way that the structure usually is the same. It actually starts with a research phase. So, really thinking
Mhm,
about what do I have in terms of available knowledge on my industry? Do I have trends available, maybe scenarios already, how the industry could further develop? And then it is really about understanding as best possible my competitors. So really doing competitor analysis, having comparable data that can get in a way very complicated if I try to simulate competitors which, for instance, are not stock listed, which do not have certain
mhm.
reporting requirements. It also gets more and more complicated to understand, for instance, what is the culture of an organization? How do they make decisions? What maybe are their core competencies beyond just the tangible resources? And then it is usually it is a 1 day workshop. So you bring together something like 30 managers, and I'll use as an example in Ingolstadt my neighbor Audi. So for instance, you bring
Mhm.
together like 30 managers from Audi, and one group of those managers will represent Audi in the simulation, and others will represent their core competitors like
Okay.
like Mercedes or BMW or a
Mhm.
Tesla, or somebody else
Or
can also be
yeah.
a software solution provider. And then those managers assign to these groups, and they have kind of the analytical material available, that what we call a game book, so that they can kind of immerse into that role. There also will be a team representing customers, also usually assigned to with managers from the company. And then usually the task is to think about, how would you position the company you're representing in the next 2 or 3 years, like, starting with a smaller time horizon. And you come up maybe with a strategy, a product offering, service offering, and you present that to the market and customer team. And then you kind of go into the second step, which is then further into the future. And so you learned about what your competitors are doing. You receive feedback from the market and customer team. And you also then need to take in consideration that, trends are evolving. You're moving further
Mhm.
into the
Mhm.
future. And then you come up again with something, strategy, product offering, and so forth. Present that again to the market and customer team, and then usually go into a third move, which then even goes further into the future, maybe beyond the usual planning horizon and so forth. And those are, in a way, the iterations that you have. And at the end, that group of managers then comes back together and can kind of share the experiences they had with looking at their industry, but also the company they work for from different perspectives, and kind of
Mhm.
share those insights, and then maybe really get into the concrete questions of what have we learned, what do we need to do.